church, and Merry Christmas to you all. Good to see your faces, and a lot of the faces that aren't here I saw last night. For those of you who don't know me, I am Rick's son. My name is Nate, and I was on staff here with Life Church for about 3 years as a teaching pastor, so I was up here teaching every other week, and I loved it, and I miss it. But a couple months ago, God called my wife and I to Tyler, Texas, to work with a missions organization with a Bible school over there, and I'm teaching with them right now and helping lead some of the curriculum. But God has allowed my family and I to come back to see my parents and some of my siblings and be home for Christmas for a little bit. And I got here, and we realized the only Sunday I was going to be here was going to be Christmas Sunday. And Dad's like, "Are you going to preach?" I'm like, "Well, it's Christmas Sunday." So no, he's like, "I really hope you should really preach." And I said, "Okay, sure." So we'll do a Christmas message, a nice quickie here. But so let's talk about Christmas. How many of you already had your Christmas first thing in the morning? Out of the way. Is anybody waiting for it later on? You guys are patient. More patient than my son, at least. How many of you have had kids or been a kid before? I hope that's universal, or you're not paying attention. There's with Christmas, with kids, and I'm getting to experience this from the parent side of things now. My son is 4 years old. It's mind-blowing. He's 4 years old, and I'm getting to see now the excitement, right, and the anticipation, and he knows it's coming, and he's not old enough to really be looking at a calendar and be taking the dates down, but he knows that it's coming. And every day it's coming closer, and he sees Santa Claus everywhere, and he sees Christmas trees and Christmas lights everywhere, and he has this concept: Christmas is out there, and it's getting closer, and it's going to happen soon. And then this morning, all the hope and all the anticipation built up and culminated in him running out of the bedroom, and all of us were waiting for him. "Merry Christmas!" And he jumped into my arms and hugged me, and then he saw the presents, and he and it's a childlike hope and wonder, and there's that thing with Christmas that kind of happens only then, and maybe with birthdays as well. But it's about the anticipation and the build-up, and if you've been a child and hoping and waiting for Christmas before, how many of you have gone looking for presents before? Anyone do that? I did that once. I never told you guys this, but one time in Columbia, Tennessee, in our home in Pickens Lane, I decided I was going to find where you put the darn presents, and I went into your bedroom and opened up the closet, and behind some things I found the mother lode of presents everywhere, and I didn't have the guts to start opening or peeking or anything, but I thought I had committed a terrible sin. I'm like, I can never speak of this to anybody. But there's the hope, right? There's the anticipation. You know it's coming, and it's getting closer, and there's the presents, and it's coming, and one day I'm going to wake up, and it's going to be Christmas. I remember we would, us siblings, myself and Kanan, the worship leader here, Elijah, who ran sound, Allie, who sang up here, we would wake up at 5 in the morning or something. It'd be still dark outside, and we're like, "It's Christmas, it's Christmas, it's Christmas." And we knock on the door, and you guys are like, "Go back to sleep. It's not Christmas yet. Go back to sleep. We're not ready for Christmas." But there's the hope, right? That's what Christmas is. That's a big part of it, I think, is the anticipation and the build-up. And if you go back to the original Christmas, and this is what I find really interesting, the hope and the anticipation and the build-up was there, but it was unlike anything that we've ever experienced or anyone could ever experience in a single lifetime. Because for the Jews, you literally have thousands of years waiting in anticipation and hope and build-up for Christmas. And they didn't know they were waiting for Christmas, but they were waiting with hope for the coming Messiah. That was their hope. That was their anticipation. Every single generation, you had a group of Jews, a group of Christians who were faithful to God, and they waited, and they prayed, and they waited, and they waited. But what's interesting here is our Christmas, our hope, our anticipation of Christmas, there's a certainty to it, isn't there? It's always going to be on the 25th. And we wake up on the 17th, and okay, it's only 8 days away. 7 days away, 6 days away, 5 days away. It's getting closer, and it comes every single year on the 25th, right? There's certainty to it. But with the Jews, and this is what I find fascinating, there was zero certainty. There was zero certainty for them, and the majority of generations, the majority of people who were waiting in anticipation for the promised Messiah to come and redeem their people, they waited generation after generation, and most of them experienced nothing. Most of them waited with the hope, waited with the anticipation of the coming Christmas, and they died before they ever saw it. 99.99% of the Jewish generations that waited for the coming Christ, that waited for the Messiah, died and their hope was not fulfilled. Many of them died still having hope that God would someday bring the Messiah. Many of them continued to wait. Many of them continued to remain faithful. But after generation of so many praying and waiting and praying and waiting and remaining faithful, many stayed, but many gave up hope. And you can see this through reading Jewish history, just reading the Old Testament. You see many begin to give up hope in the promise that God had given them of the coming of Messiah. Many turned away and decided their hope was for nothing. But every generation there was always a remnant. You always hear God in the Old Testament talking about my remnant of my faithful, my people. For the Jews, those of you who know much about the Old Testament, their whole identity, their whole hope, their whole faithfulness was based on a promise that God made to a guy named Abraham, thousands of years before many of them were even born. In Genesis chapter 12, verses 2 and 3, we have this little promise that God makes Abraham. He says, I will make you into a great nation, and I will bless you, and I will make your name great, and you will be a blessing. And I will bless those who bless you, and all the peoples on the earth will be blessed through you, Abraham. Abraham recognized this as being a promise about Abraham's lineage. He said, I will make you into a nation. In other words, I'm going to make your descendants into a great nation. And I'm going to use your nation to be a light to the world and to bless the entire world. This was the promise of the Jewish people, okay? And they're like, we are God's chosen people, descendants of Abraham, descendants of the promise of God, lights to the world, to bless the world through us, right? And so Abraham had a son named Isaac, right? And Isaac had a son named Jacob, a.k.a. Israel was his other name. And Israel had a lot of sons who moved to a place called Egypt. I'm giving you an Old Testament survey right now, so write it down. Israel had a lot of sons who moved to Egypt, and within Egypt they multiplied and became many, many, many. They became a nation's worth of people. And then God delivered those people from Egypt. We all know that story with Moses, right? And then those people moved into the land that God had promised Abraham and his descendants, the land of Canaan. And so within the land of Canaan, we all know the story of King Saul and King David, right? The people, those descendants of Abraham, became bigger and bigger and bigger and became a kingdom, and a prosperous kingdom, and a thriving kingdom, a big kingdom within the land of Canaan. And so they're thinking, this is how the promise is fulfilled. This is how we will be a great nation. This is how we will be a blessing to all the world. This is how we will bless all peoples of the earth. We are going to be the greatest nation in the world. And many of them had this idea that God's promise meant that they would spread and grow until the world was the nation of Israel. And all people were God's people. This is this idea and this concept they had in their heads. And this was going to be the kingdom. This was the way that we'd see the fulfillment of the promise of God to Abraham, the promise for God's people. You had David. You had the golden age of Israel. We had the golden age of wisdom and wealth with Solomon. And then those of you who have read this stuff know where I'm going with this. Because once we hit Solomon, and the kings after him, things were incredible for a little while, and then the people, Israel, began to forget about their hope. And they began to forget about the promise, and they began to forget about who they were, and they began to turn away to other things, and turn away to other ways of life, like the other nations around them lived for, turn away to other gods, turn their back on their God forever, and they lost sight of what their hope was all about. They lost sight of who they were, and everything begins to fall apart really quick at that point. You have the people of God as chosen people who are set aside to be God's missionary group to the world, a light to all peoples, a blessing to all peoples of the earth, warring against each other. They're killing each other, and they're fighting each other, and they split into two different kingdoms, Israel in the north and Judah in the south. And then what we're going to have here is you have good kings some years, and you have bad kings, you have back and forth, but mostly a lot of bad kings who lived for themselves, they lived for selfishness, and they conspired with foreign nations and brought foreign gods into the holy places. And the peoples turned from God, not just a little bit, not a minority turning from God, but to the point where so many of them lost sight of who they were and what they were all about that the majority of them had turned from Yahweh, and there was a minority that was left following him. This is the heritage of the Jewish people. This is why God refers to that minority who continued to have faith in him and follow him and obey him as a remnant. You guys know what a remnant is? If you take a sword and you smash it to pieces and you have one tiny bit that's salvageable, that's a remnant. So there's a faithful remnant of my people. And after Solomon's reign, over the next 1,000-year period, what you see is the kingdom of Israel, the chosen people of Israel, were conquered and subjugated by foreign pagan nations. Again and again and again and again. Because God said, if you're not going to follow me, if you're not going to hold up your end of the bargain, because the promise, by the way, was, I will make you great, I will use you to bless all peoples, you will be my people, and I will be your God, if you will follow me and obey my commandments. These are his words to Moses. He's like, if you're not going to hold up your end of the bargain, I'm going to let you experience the consequences of your actions. And he took his hands off of them, and he let them self-destruct. And they did. You had the Syrians come along and destroy the northern kingdom of Israel. Then you have the Babylonians come along and destroy the southern kingdom of Judah. And you have the Persians come along and they subjugate the Jews after that. And then you have the Greeks after that. And you have the Romans after that. Over and over and over again. What's fascinating, within the next 1,000 years after Solomon's reign, over 25 times the children of Israel changed hands in terms of who was over them. What foreign nation ruled over them. And God's people had become slaves, had become lesser than everyone else. They were right back where they started in Egypt before God brought them out. He said, if you want to destroy yourselves, I'm going to let you destroy yourselves. But there will be a remnant that I will pull out, and I will bring my hope and my promise through them. There was always a prophet who God would send, and he'd say, you turn away from your course. And I will take that remnant that stays faithful to me, and I will fulfill my promises through them. He began to talk of sending a Messiah. I'll bring a Messiah. I will bring someone to redeem you guys, to bring salvation to you. But the people of God became lesser than everyone else. They had no army. They had no authority. They had no power. At one point with the Babylonian captivity, they were dragged away from their homes, from the promised land, dragged away, subjugated for over 70 years. This is what the people of God had reduced themselves to, and the nation of Israel became a nothing, became worthless, less than any other nation. And these people whose identity in their hearts and in their minds was God's people, the people of God's promise, the children of Abraham, they're crushed. How could God let this happen to his people? And many, many, many thought that God had abandoned them. God had turned from them. They said, well, this idea that God, and these prophets come to them and say, God can still redeem you. God will send a Messiah to save you. And they would scoff. They would laugh at him and say, the idea that God could use this broken group of people to do anything or be anything meaningful. It's ridiculous. And many turned away from God forever. And then finally, in 65 BC, we have possibly the greatest insult of all, in which Pompey the great Roman general, he walks into a defeated Jerusalem. He pushes past the temple guards into the temple, past the priests, marches right into the Holy of Holies. And those of you who know anything about the Holy of Holies know that there was a place that the priests only went into this place once a year to serve God. Once a year on an appointed time, they would come in to serve God. And the Jews believed that if you walked in unannounced and uninvited, you would be killed immediately because God dwelled in that place. And this Roman general has conquered the Jews again, marches right into the temple, pushes past the priests into the Holy of Holies, and the priests and temple guards gasp. Walks in, looks around, walks out of Jerusalem. And the word spreads, And the implication is God is dead, or he doesn't care about the Jews anymore. And that was the breaking point for even more of them. And many turned to a Greek lifestyle. Many turned to a Roman lifestyle. Live as the Romans do. Many walked away from God. They said, where is God? Clearly he doesn't care about us anymore. He's allowed us to be humiliated in every way of life. He's allowed us to be broken and subjugated and beaten. What hope? What hope can we have when God is gone? He's dead or abandoned Israel. And then, of course, some still clung to the promises of God. Some still clung to hope, saying, no, God will send a Messiah. No, God will bring redemption to his people. He will fulfill his promise to us. He will bring salvation to the Jews. And that number of those who remained faithful became smaller and smaller and smaller, generation after generation after generation. But there's a necessity of hope, isn't there? It's very important for people to have hope. Because what you see in the Jews who lost hope is they did one of two things. Just read through Jewish history and you see this happening. You have to go outside the Bible to read about the period of time in between when the Old Testament ends and the New Testament begins. But what you see is the Jews who lost hope either turned to a self-destructive lifestyle or they killed themselves. Over and over and over again, when you have a loss of hope, this is what you see, and this is what you see in the Jews. When they lost their hope in something better that was coming, in redemption or in salvation or in help at the end of the tunnel, they would self-destruct or kill themselves. And that is the human option when you have no hope. You have self-destruction or you have suicide. Those are your options when you reach the point of despair. Which is why you see so many people, when they reach a point where they conclude they have no hope in life. That's why people kill themselves. Because if you have complete despair, you have no reason to live. There's a necessity for hope. This is why you go to 1 Corinthians 13, the love chapter, right? And Paul talks about three things that is incredibly essential to every human being. He says faith, hope, and love. And we love to talk about love in church, right? We love to talk about faith in church, right? We never really talk about hope. It's kind of the odd one out of the group. But Paul recognized it is so incredibly important for human beings to have hope. We have to have hope. You read the book of Job, and you see this guy who is broken. He's lost everything. He's been beaten down by everything in life. And he's questioning God, and he's attacking God. And he's saying, where are you? Why have you allowed this to happen to me? What have I done to deserve this? But he does not reach a point of despair, because you see throughout the book he has these moments where he says, no, God will give me justice. He will vindicate me. And he has a hope at the end of a tunnel that keeps him going on. It keeps him pursuing God and questioning God. You're going to give me answers for this, because he has hope. And he says, no, there was a time in which the favor of God was upon my tent. It's like, I'm going to find God again. Because he had hope. And this is very important for us to think about these things and to think about the Jewish experience of Christmas and the generation after generation after generation in which people held on to hope and died continuing to hold on to their hope. Because there are going to be points in our life, if you have not experienced this already, you will experience it. I wish I could tell you that you won't, but you will. In which God is going to be so incredibly quiet and so seemingly inactive in your life and apparently silent, and you are going to be hurting and suffering, and it's going to seem for moments as if there is no hope for you. And you're going to be tempted to allow yourself to despair. Now, what's the point? There's no way out. This is it. There's no hope for me. Why am I remaining faithful? And when you reach the point of despair, you have two options. There are going to be seasons of your life in which your hope is being crushed by everything, and it seems like God is doing nothing. This is why so many of the Jews walked away. They're, where is God? Do something. Give us a sign. Do something. And he said, forget this. I'm done. And they would self-destruct or suicide. There are going to be seasons of your life in which you are threatened by the exact things the Jews went through. Those of you who have been coming to this church for more than 6 months know that a couple months after God called my family back to Texas to work with the School of the Bible with Youth at the Mission, my wife, one day, we were packing our house, and she collapsed into what we now know as a grand mal seizure out of nowhere. And it was, myself and my kids are there, and she's seizing, and she stops breathing, and she's not moving, and I'm on the phone with 911, and my children are crying, and we have no idea what's going on, and we rush her to the hospital, and we find out later that she has a mass on the brain, and she has an oligodendroglioma. She has a brain tumor on the left side of her brain in a very sensitive place, and it's not a matter of just taking it out. And we went through, and to some degree are still going through, a season of life in which our hope is being crushed. And we would sit in the intensive care unit night after night. My wife hooked up to all kinds of things, on all kinds of drugs, having no idea what was going to happen or if she was going to be alive tomorrow or the next week. My children were going to have a mother. And say, where are you, God? What have we done to deserve this? I've been faithful to you. I'm packing up my entire life and my entire comfort to move to a new place, move my family to a new place so I can serve you. Why are you allowing this to happen to us? And there were many, many times where I stood on the precipice between hope and despair because God was silent. And it seemed like I had no hope or no way out. But at the beginning of that experience, we're sitting in the waiting room of the ER while she's having all kinds of scans done on that first night. I remember sitting there with you, Dad, and you, Mom. Some of you also came there to be with us. We're sitting there, and one of Savannah's sisters told me, she said, I feel like God said she's going to be okay. And we were sitting in the intensive care unit a couple days later, despairing again. And I felt like God said, I want you to open the Bible. And I did. And he gave a word to me. He said, in the book of Psalms, he said, through the midst of your suffering, there's going to be a point where you're going to sit at my table. You're going to be with me. And not just in the life ahead, but in this life here. You're going to sit at your table, and I'm going to prosper you, and I'm going to bless you. And for the last few months, we have over and over and over again come to a point of the precipice between despair and hope. And over and over again, we look back at the things that God has said, and we have clung to them so tightly. And she'll be despairing, or I'll be despairing, and we'll remind each other, God said you're going to be okay. God said he's going to prosper us. We're going to sit at his table, and we're going to eat with him. We held on to his words, and that was our hope. We held on to it, and we're still holding on to it. Because if there's a light at the end of the tunnel, we're still in the tunnel. But we're holding on to hope. Like that remnant of the Jews held on to hope. And they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they waited, and they were faithful, and they hoped upon their God that he would bring redemption to his people. They hoped upon the promises of Isaiah. He says, God will send a Messiah, and he will be called Emmanuel. You will call him God with man. And they waited. And there were shepherds living out in the fields nearby, keeping watch over their flocks at night. And an angel of the Lord appeared to them, and the glory of the Lord shone around them, and they were terrified. But the angel said to them, "Do not be afraid. I bring you good news that will cause great joy for all the people. Today, in the town of David, a Savior has been born to you. He is the Messiah, the Lord. This will be a sign to you. You will find a baby wrapped in clothes and lying in a manger." Suddenly, a great company of the heavenly host appeared with the angel, praising God and saying, "Glory to God in the highest heaven, and on earth peace to those on whom his favor rests." And the hope and the anticipation culminated in the birth of Jesus Christ. And Christmas is a day in which we not only celebrate the coming of Christ, but in which we celebrate the fact that we have a God in whom our hope is well placed. We have a God in whom we can hope with confidence, as the Jews for 1,000 years hoped and waited, and he fulfilled the promise of hope that he gave to them. And I'm hoping in him. Every day I'm casting my hope upon him. And for me, today is a great day because I get to celebrate it with my family and I get to give my children gifts. But it's a great day because I know the history of the Jews. And I know that for those Jews who received the Messiah and who received the fullness of the promise of Christ, Christmas represents a day in which the fulfillment of their hope was realized. And that's a really cool thing. So we're going to have the band come up here as we wrap this up. But I'm going to pray. Father, thank you that you are a faithful and you are a good God. Thank you that our hope is well founded in you, Lord. Thank you that you are a redeemer. Thank you that you reach out to us, Father. Thank you that you're so reliable. Thank you for Christ. Thank you for Christmas. And I pray that you'd give us a fuller revelation of the coming of Christ and the fulfillment of your promise to save not only the Jews, but to save his people, all people, from their sins. We love you, Father. Amen.